Uh, so welcome back, everyone, to day 2 of our third CIPHER conference. Yesterday was mainly devoted to methodology of running, selecting, using panels in methodological experiments. Today, we'll mainly focus on the use of panels and the data we collect with them. So today would be more of a substantive emphasis, and particularly, of course, the role of panels during the COVID pandemic and how that has helped us understand what's going on in the world by using our probability-based internet panels. So I hope we have, like yesterday, a great day with great discussions and great presentations.
Thank you so much, Tara and Ari. It's great to be here, actually. I'm calling in from Singapore, so it's very exciting to be part of a global community all discussing this at the same time. What we're going to be doing is kicking off today's conference with the first session on survey data collection and analysis. And today, for that session, as you'll see in the agenda, we have 4 really exciting complementary talks, starting with Marco Angrisani discussing questions to elicit bank account ownership and thinking about the way in which we pose simple questions in an online setting and what that does for us. We'll follow that up with, as Ari said, 2 presentations that more directly address the COVID pandemic, with Jill Darling talking to us about how we collect COVID-19 behavior, attitudes, and experiences, followed by Andy Parker talking about how we use these online panel surveys to track emerging public mental models of COVID. And then last but not least, we have the combined task force of Stephen Schneider and Margie Gatz talking about how we develop a perceptual speed test for the Understanding America study. So again, for all panelists, the format of the panel, just to reiterate, will be 10 minutes of presentation followed by individual question and answer for 5 minutes. And then at the end, if we do have time, a little bit of general discussion for the panel as well. So without further ado, let me just introduce our first speaker, Marco Angrisani. Marco is an economist at the Center for Economic and Social Research, who is deeply immersed in questions related to online panel data collection and analysis. His research agenda covers many different aspects of survey data methodology, from sampling and weighting to measurement properties of questions. And as I mentioned, he's going to be talking to us today about how a questionnaire experiment was implemented to elicit bank account ownership. Marco, please.
Thank you, Joanne. Yes, so this is joint work with Mick Cooper, and as Joanne said, the topic is eliciting bank account ownership in an online panel. So ownership of a bank account is a rather objective measure, and you would think that it should be relatively easy to elicit using survey questions and should suffer from little or no recall error. However, if you think about the way a particular question is phrased and its placement within a survey, the combination of these 2 factors may still influence how respondents answer even a simple question such as one about bank account ownership. And these effects may really vary a lot depending on the interview mode. I like to think of this work as a sort of investigative story where we first discover a data puzzle concerning bank account ownership in the Understanding America study, and then we try to solve it. As I say, the context of this study is the UAS, and in the UAS, the full health and retirement study instrument is administered to all UAS members every 2 years. The HRS questionnaire is replicated 100%, just with some adaptation due to the change in administration mode. In a previous paper, we have compared data from the original HRS and from the UAS version of the HRS. And by and large, our results suggest that internet and an online survey like the UAS can really match high quality traditional data from a traditional survey like the HRS. We did not look at bank account ownership for that particular paper or analysis. And later on, when we started working with this measure in the UAS, and regardless of any comparison with the HRS, we found some puzzling numbers, and we tried to understand why we were getting those numbers that seemed to be really not in line with what the official statistics would suggest. So let me tell you how the story evolved. First of all, I need to tell you about the HRS module that elicits financial value and ownership of financial assets. So this is a very detailed module that in the following order asks about ownership and value of different financial assets: IRAs, pension accounts, annuities, stocks, bonds, and then checking, savings, and money market accounts. If somebody answers yes to this question, is supposed to be a bank account owner. And finally, there is a question about CDs and T-bills. Now, given that the question about bank accounts comes after a series of questions about other financial assets, the question says, aside from anything you have already mentioned, do you or your partner have any checking or savings accounts or money market funds? Please do not include certificates of deposit. When we administered this question without any modification in wave 1 of the UIS HRS, we found that the rate of bank account ownership was 55%. This data, of the bulk of this data, was collected between 2015 and 2017. Now, in 2017, there were 2 nationally representative surveys on unbanked and underbanked households in the United States, one by the FDIC and another one is a supplement of the CPS. And in both cases, bank account ownership in the US was 93.5%. So what may have caused such large discrepancy? We guessed that the combination of survey text and placement within the survey was the main responsible. In particular, after a long series of questions, if you say, aside from anything you have already mentioned, you may trigger a negative answer because respondents may think that they have been already asked about checking and savings accounts, especially because these are the most basic type of financial assets. Second, the note, please do not include CDs, may cause confusion because some respondents may be not familiar with this type of financial assets. And most importantly, there is no question preceding the one about bank account ownership that talks about CDs. Now, these effects that we guessed were present may be more apparent or more relevant when the survey is self-administered, like in the UAS. Instead, if you think about the HRS, the presence of an interviewer, either in person or on the phone, may clarify any doubts. So these effects may be less important. So in wave 2, we followed our lead and we simplified the question about bank account ownership, but we left it at the very same place in the questionnaire. The simplification involved deleting the expression aside from anything you have already mentioned and the note about not including CDs. And when we did that, the rate of bank account ownership jumped up to 79%. Most importantly, as you can see here at the bottom in this table, among all those who say no to the bank account ownership in wave 1, 61% of them said yes in wave 2, suggesting that the phrasing of the question really mattered for how respondents approached and answered this question. So we were really intrigued by this result, and we designed a questionnaire experiment and administered to all UAS members in 2017 to shed further light on these mechanisms. We mimicked the HRS instrument and we asked about ownership of financial assets in the following order: first stocks, then bonds, then CDs and T-bills, and finally checking, savings, and money market accounts. We randomly assigned respondents to 3 types of bank account ownership questions using an increasing level of simplification. 1/3 was given the original HRS question. 1/3 was given the simplified version that I just showed you, where mainly we delete the expression aside from anything else and the note about CDs. I'm going to call this simple 1. And 1/3 was given a further simplified version where we separate a question about checking and savings from a question about money market funds. And I'm going to call this simple 2. This is a balance test for the 3 arms of the experiment and everything looks fine. So I'm not going to spend time on it. Let me show you the results. So if you move from HRS to simplification 1, which is basically what we did moving from wave one to wave 2 of the UAS HRS, bank account ownership in the entire sample goes from 74% to 85%. If you focus only on primary respondents, so you have just one observation per household, the difference is exactly the same, 75% versus 86%. What happens if you move from simple 1 to simple 2? So what is the effect of separating the question about checking and savings from the one about money market funds? Well, you have a further increase. In the entire sample, you go from 85 to 91%. If you focus only on primary respondents, you go from 86 to 93%. So if you want to see the overall effect of this experiment, moving from the original HRS question to this simplified version that we came up with, you are actually increasing bank account ownership by 17 to 18 percentage points, and you are basically at the population target, which is the orange line in this graph, and this is taken from the 2017 CPS unbanked supplement, that is 93.5%. Let me tell you a little bit more about the treatment effects. So these are the treatment effects in the bottom panel. Those are the unconditional treatment effects. So moving from HRS to simple 1, which is basically deleting the expression aside from anything you have already mentioned, increases bank account ownership by 11 percentage points. If you separate the questions, checking and savings, from the one about money market funds, you increase bank account ownership by 6 percentage points. So overall, the effect is 17 percentage points. And these numbers are basically the same if you condition on demographics. Now, one important thing is to explore heterogeneity in treatment effects. And we did this exercise for different variables, but I want to focus on two that I believe are particularly relevant. One is cognitive ability, another one is financial literacy. So in this first exercise, we divide the sample into quartiles of the cognitive ability score. Why do we think that cognitive ability matters? Well, because if the issue is that individuals get confused when you say aside from anything else, this has something to do with short-term memory and therefore with cognitive ability, because they need to remember what they have been asked before in order to answer the question about bank account ownership correctly. That's precisely what we see, because you see in this first panel here, when you move from HRS to simplification 1, the treatment effect is much larger for those in the bottom of the distribution of cognitive ability. It's about 12 percentage points versus only 4 percentage points among those with the highest level of cognitive ability. And the difference by quartile is significant. We also see very sharp differences across quartiles, moving from simple 1 to simple 2. Remember, this means separating the question about checking and savings from the one about money market funds. Why is this the case? Well, first of all, cognitive ability is strongly related to financial knowledge. And we believe that if you combine the question of checking savings and money markets in one question, you may make this question more difficult to answer for respondents who may be unfamiliar with money market funds. If they don't know what that is, and they focus particularly on the last word of this question, which is money market funds, you may trigger a negative answer. Overall, if you see this total effect across cognitive ability quartiles, you see that there is a sharp difference across them. The total effect is as high as 25 percentage points in the lowest quartile and 7 percentage points in the highest quartile. When we do the breakdown by financial literacy, we see similar things. I want to focus just on the change from simple 1 to simple 2, because here you really back the story that we have in mind. Among people with low level of financial literacy, the treatment effect is 14 percentage points and is basically not different from 0 in the highest quartile of financial literacy, where respondents are more likely to know what money market funds are. So just to conclude, questionnaire simplification greatly affects survey reports, even for a relatively simple construct like bank account ownership. I want to stress that our results refer to self-administered online interviews and should not be generalized to other modes of interview, but I think this would still provide useful insights, even for an in-person or on the phone interview like the HRS. Overall, our findings confirm that high-quality survey data start from asking the right questions, and most of the time, the right question is one that is as simple and precise as possible. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Marco. So in fact, I think that it is a terrific demonstration of how more is not necessarily more, and that in this particular case, adding more explanation is in fact so very counterproductive. And I'm actually very shocked by the magnitude of that effect. That seems really much larger than I would have anticipated.
I had the same type of feeling. I mean, before we simplified, and without even doing the experiment, before we simplified the question, we just tried, and we did not expect such large effects that are confirmed by the experiment, by the way, which is reassuring somehow.
Well, it's reassuring for us scientifically and terribly unreassuring for us in practice. Can I take the question from the chat, which is coming from Abhilasha Saxena, was asking you to clarify how you measured cognitive ability and financial literacy.
Sure. There are really comprehensive batteries of questions eliciting cognitive ability and financial literacy in the UAS. With several items. I don't remember the number of tests for cognitive ability, but I believe there are over 40 or 50 tests. And for financial literacy, I know there are 14 questions. So basically, we construct composite indices for both skills.
And we also have another question coming from another member of the audience. I think it's Ari asking, Marco, it's still puzzling that some people have a bank account in one wave and then by their own report lose it in the next wave. I mean, is that worth some further exploration?
Yeah, we should, I agree. I think Ari is referring to this table here. So yeah, you do see that, for instance, about 9% of people have a bank account in wave 1 and that they don't have it in wave 2. This could be, you know, even measurement error, but I believe that, yeah, 9% is a quite high fraction. So we should investigate this a little bit closer and maybe take also information from other surveys that elicit bank account ownership. In particular, I'm thinking of the consumer payment choice that we have in the UAS every year.
Yeah, and I think Andy Parker is suggesting that perhaps that 9% could also be due maybe to the deleted phrases. Perhaps that's also an effect. I want to take one last question here in the Q&A from Frederick Conrad, who's asking, unless I am not understanding the simplified wording of the questions, how can you be sure that the increase in the simplified reports do not include some false alarms?
What do you mean by false alarms?
Frederick, would you like to clarify?
Reporting that they have a bank, it's really the same question Ari asked, I think. How can you be sure that they're not misreporting that they do in fact have bank accounts?
Yeah, well, I think this is a legitimate concern, but given the numbers that we see, I think that there's quite a bit of strong evidence that is going in the direction we just described, which means this simplification seems to increase reporting of bank account ownership rather than decrease it. Of course, there are always people who behave differently, and I agree we should investigate this more. But I don't think that our main conclusions are affected looking at the numbers.
No, I mean, I think in some validation checks, perhaps with
Sure.
here we're having some administrative data to sort of cross-check people is also really interesting because there are movements in and out, I think, of bank accounts.
Yeah, and that always happens. I mean,
exactly. All right, well, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next presentation. Thank you so much, Marco.